mistaken, and another one. I know that in terms of arrangements that were made last week, there were papers that were to be filed yesterday. I have seen, I think, one or two. I've seen, I think, an application by Mr. Ajay Gupta. I've seen correspondence from the attorney for the former president indicating a certain position. I've seen, I think, an affidavit, or maybe a supplementary affidavit by Mr. Hlongwana. But I don't know whether those have been put into this file already or not, because if they haven't, we would need to have this file maybe updated so that then when I deal with them, I know that I've got everything with me.
We were under the impression, Chair, that the attorney for the Commission would in fact provide you with a properly ordered set of applications yesterday. If that hasn't been done, then it must be done in order. But perhaps to avoid any further delays, I should put on record that there's a draft application in addition to the ones you have made on behalf of Ms. Lynn Brown and two others.
Yeah.
But perhaps, Chair, for the present at least, those that are present and wish to make applications should just place themselves on record, and you can decide how you wish to deal with it from there. There is an anxiety amongst both the legal team and amongst the representatives of the implicated parties that the applications be heard this week and perhaps even tomorrow if possible.
Yeah. One, the Commission's attorney was in touch with me yesterday, and he did offer to bring papers to my residence at a certain stage in the afternoon. And I said if he emailed them to my secretary for purposes of yesterday, that would be fine. But he undertook that he would make sure that there are hard copies available this morning. But he was not going to be available himself because he has some personal matter to attend to. But he indicated that an attorney from his firm would be here. So he did mention that. So I'm quite happy that we do the following. One, as you suggest, counsel representing parties that have filed such applications place themselves on record. And two, I think I can then discuss the way forward in regard to the applications, particularly as to when they can be dealt with. And if we are able to dispose of that, then I can hear Ms. Williams, the balance of Ms. Williams' evidence.
Indeed, that is the plan.
Yes. Okay.
May I also place on record then that, as you know, Advocate Maleka will deal with the applications on behalf of the legal team.
Thank you. Thank you. So maybe then counsel representing parties that have filed applications may just come up and place themselves on record. Mr. Helens.
May it please you, Mr. Commissioner, I confirm that in accordance with the arrangements made last week with the evidence leaders and indeed yourself, Mr. Ajay Gupta has filed an application in terms of the rules of this Commission to cross-examine Ms. Mentor and Mr. Maseku. He has also filed an affidavit in respect of both those parties, setting out his version of the events, and from which he clearly emerges the areas of dispute between the parties. There's a small typographical error which I won't bother you with in paragraph 5 of the application, which is obviously separate from the affidavit. The wisdom of the computer changed the word precognized into recognized and makes the sentence unfathomably obscure.
Yes.
But the word is precognized.
Yes.
I do not intend to argue it now. I just give you a glimpse that in the applications to cross-examine, we will want to take on boldly the methodology of the preparation of witnesses for cross-examination, the issue of the limitation either in time or subject matter of cross-examination, and the linked apparent suggestion, but we see this in the press, we don't see it yet from our learned friends, that the right to cross-examine is linked to an undertaking to actually give evidence here. But I don't argue any of those points.
Yes.
They are foreshadowed in the applications,
Yes.
and I merely confirm that on behalf of Mr. A.J. Gupta, the evidence of Mr. Maseko and Ms. Mentor is sought to be cross-examined.
Yes, maybe let me raise with you, Mr. Helens, issues relating to the way forward, so that other counsel representing other parties will also know what I have in mind, and they can begin to consider whether they would be happy with that. One, I assume that the Commission's legal team does not intend to file any affidavit in response to the affidavit by Mr. Ajay Gupta and any other implicated person who has applied. But if they do, that is the Commission's legal team, if they do wish to file some affidavit, that will obviously affect the issue of the date when the hearing can be held. But assuming they don't intend to file such an affidavit, what is your assessment? Is it that you would like to file any heads, or you don't really feel that you need to file any heads? From my side, not necessarily because I want heads, but if counsel thinks that it's necessary and they would like to have time, obviously I would like to give consideration to that. So that's another matter that may affect the question of when the hearing can happen.
In response to that, let me say that I'm fully in favor of, I think this is an obvious point, by the way, of you being as assisted as possible by the arguments.
Yeah.
So if if an argument by myself were to be put forward, and my learned friends would have to deal with it on their feet, so to speak, you may be less served by their answer to mine. Equally the other way around.
Yes.
And I do not seek a delay. If it were up to me, I would argue the entire question right now.
Yes.
And cross-examine, if I'm allowed, Mr. Maseku later in the week. There's just a little bit of work I have to do.
Yes.
But we've provisionally suggested Thursday, but no one is bound by that at all,
yes,
including yourself.
Yes.
So in the interests of you, sir, I would suggest that heads be filed by both parties, so that no one is caught unawares. But I don't make that submission in order to delay in any way. I can do it right now.
Yes, yes. Okay, no, that's fine. I think what I suggest that what we should do is the following. One, I allow each counsel who represents an implicated party who has applied to place themselves on record and indicate their position in regard to the two issues I've raised with you. But I am wondering whether once they have done that, we shouldn't do one of two things. Either we resume the evidence of Ms. Williams while counsel for the implicated persons and the relevant member or members of the Commission's legal team get time to try and work out what they might all suggest I should make directions in terms of if there is to be heads of argument to be filed, when should they be filed, and a suggestion maybe on possible dates for hearing, and then I can look at either that date or those dates. So when we have a break or when we are done with her, depending how long her evidence will be, then I can be informed of any agreement that the parties might have reached. I can look at the terms. If I'm happy, I can make that my directions. If I'm not happy, I can adjust here and there. What do you think? We would either do that on the basis that we resume Ms. Williams' evidence and continue, and maybe at tea break or when she finishes, whichever happens first, and then we will then look at what the product of your discussions will have been. Or if you think that it won't take long, I could stand down for 10 minutes without resuming her evidence and allow the parties to talk, and then you come back. So, but it may well be that we should, I don't know how long Ms. Hofmeyer expects Ms. Williams to take.
Chair, I don't envisage more than an hour.
Okay, all right. So maybe in that event, we should resume her evidence, hearing her evidence, while that time is used by counsel on all sides to discuss with the Commission's legal team possible terms of the direction that I could consider issuing.
As it pleases you, Mr. Commissioner, should I or should I not in those discussions include the topic of the right to cross-examine being linked to an undertaking to in presence in South Africa to give evidence? Mr. Maleka suggests I should, with a vigorous nod of his head.
I think that you should feel free to raise any issue that you think you would like to know in advance if it might affect anything.
So be it.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Let's get counsel for other implicated persons to come forward, place themselves on record, and confirm that they are happy with the arrangement that we have just made.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, my surname is Jubair. I am instructed by Van der Merwe attorneys in respect of the evidence led by Mr. Jonas. We filed an application on behalf of Mr. Ajay Gupta, Mr. Rajesh Gupta, and Mr. Duduzane Zuma to cross-examine. I also equally would favor the opportunity to rather file heads of argument before we argue, and we will take up all the other issues with the evidence leaders.
Okay. Thank you. And you are happy with the arrangement that we have just
Indeed,
provisionally made? Okay, thank you.
May it please you, Mr. Chairman, I'm Jaap Silje from the Pretoria Bar, instructed by Mr. Stockenstroom Fouché for Mr. Fana Shlongwane.
Yes.
As you said, an application has already been filed on behalf of Mr. Shlongwane.
Yes.
I don't want to repeat, we will abide your ruling, and we think it's a good arrangement that we meet with the legal team in order to try and sort out the time aspects of an application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Silje.
Esteemed Chairperson, I'm Simi Bala from the Pretoria Bar Senior Counsel. I appear with my colleague, Mr. Lusenga, who has already placed us on record.
Yes.
We appear for the former executive political head of the Department of Public Enterprises, Mrs. Lynn Brown. We stand before you as supplicants because we have an unsigned application. Our client is based in Cape Town. A signed copy is going to be made available this afternoon. We've taken the liberty to provide a copy to our esteemed evidence leaders, colleagues, and have no objection to the copy. We anchor on the heel of our colleagues' approach in accepting that we'll draw heads to assist the work of the Commission, to inquire into, to report on, to make findings, and eventually make recommendations. The only issue that bewails us that is likely to happen is there might be a debate on the interpretation of implicating. It appears as if our learned friends, on behalf of the evidence leaders, are likely to say Ms. Brown has not been implicated, which becomes a subjective argument or an objective argument. And we will join issue if need be, if we're called upon to do.
Okay, no, that's fine. I must confess that at least in terms of evidence that has been placed, that we have had, obviously, I might not know any statements that the Commission's legal team might have in their possession that might not have reached me. But in terms of evidence that has been led over the past 2 weeks, I don't remember Ms. Brown's name being mentioned by any witness. But at this stage, I'm not going to say anything. I'll wait to see what your discussions with the Commission's legal team produces. It may well be, from what you have said, it may well be that you or your client take the view that she has been implicated in one way or another, even though her name might not have been mentioned by any witness. Or it may well be that you or she knows something that along the lines that she will be implicated in due course, and therefore she would like to make the application already. So I would leave that to be discussed between yourself and the Commission's legal team. But it may well be that if she is not implicated as yet, the application might not be properly considered until she is implicated. But we won't have a debate about that at this stage. It may well be that in the discussions that you will have with the Commission's legal team, you may persuade one another one way or another. So I will look at the issue only when I have to.
May I interpose?
Yes.
Esteemed Chair, please do not agonize much. The facts which are stubborn before this Commission will demonstrate that.
Yes.
There are clips, there's a record to that effect. We haven't set our teeth on it to say, rain or shine, will demonstrate it. If it's in the abstract, it is there, it's standing before the Commission. But to assure you also, term of reference 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 relates directly to our client, who is the former political head of the Department of Public Enterprises. Now,
yes.
A witness comes before the Commission and say, the Gupta says we worked with her. And the terms of reference brings her to the fore in line with those specific paragraphs that we've mentioned in terms of the Commission's terms of reference. Now,
yes.
It leaves us home and cold as to whether could it be interpreted could it be interpreted as a direct implication as viewed objectively or as viewed by the evidence leaders? Hence we say, do not agonize much,
Yes.
we'll demonstrate it.
Yes.
definitely.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
With your leave, Mr. Chair, it's necessary to,
Oh, I think there's still counsel for implicated persons.
just before
Yes.
that, in relation to the address that you've just heard,
Yes,
it is correct that we received the unsigned statement this morning.
Yes.
But it's necessary to place on record that despite my learned friend's statement that there was no objection, obviously the rights of the Commission legal team are reserved in relation both to the procedure adopted as well as to the substance of the application.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Henry Cowley, counsel from Johannesburg Bar. I'm instructed by MVP attorneys. We represent Ms. Kaunda. As
Yes.
you know, we have an application for cross-examination.
Yes.
We also support the notion to file heads of argument, and we also support the
Discussion.
discussion. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you very much. Oh, there's still one more. Thank you.
A pleasant morning, Chair.
Thank you.
It's Suela, and I concur that I still represent both officers from the Hawks, Advocate Mtolo and the Major General Nonopi. I place it on record, Chair, that we also harbor the desire to cross-examine both Ms. Feki Mento and the Honorable Mr. Jonas. The reason being, the evidence they adduced before the Honorable Commission has somehow detrimentally implicated both our clients. And the analogy of such evidence necessitate that cross-examination.
No, don't move the application yet.
Yeah, I want, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I accept that they are implicated.
And further, we are happy with your benevolent guidance and the current arrangement.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The one thing that I want to raise with you following the discussion I had with you here in the commission when you placed yourself on record last week is just to clarify one thing. I had mentioned in regard to, I don't know whether, I think only one of your clients. I don't know whether it was Major General or was it Brigadier General Nonopi, but in regard to one of them, I had said I had gained the impression when I read the affidavit that it might not be the full version in relation to the incidents, and I had asked you to reflect and take instructions whether it's a full version, because that's important that in regard to the incidents or allegations implicating the persons, we have the full version. What is the position? Is what we have a full version?
Indeed, that's extremely crucial, and we've ventilated those issues by filing a supplementary affidavit where we have comprehensively replied to each and every allegation.
Yes.
And to set out those issues which are in dispute.
Yes.
We have done so as we undertook on our last
Yes.
appearance
Okay.
on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah. So the papers were evenly filed with the attorney for the commission.
Yes.
To answer you, Chair, yes, we have
Yes.
supplemented our
Yes.
affidavit, not only of Major General Nonopi,
Yes.
but also of Advocate Ndolo.
Dollar. Okay. No,
Yes.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. From from what I've just said now and part of what I said last week, then all counsel and attorneys for implicated persons will have gathered that I require a full version in regard to allegations implicating third persons. That's important. Part of the reason why it's important is it will give me an idea of how much time, if I grant permission to cross-examine, I should grant. But also, it's important to give me an idea of what the cross-examination will, what it will cover. So, I know that Mr. Helens very properly took note of this last week and announced that he was to make sure that there was a full version from his client. I'm hoping that all counsel have taken note and that if their instructions are that what has been put up is not a full version, when they discuss with the Commission's legal team, allowance can be made for them to file whatever supplementary affidavit to ensure a full version. But that will be the subject of discussion between all parties and subject to my approval. Mr. Pretorius, you want to say something?
Yes. Chair, may I ask you to reconsider your direction in relation to whether the legal team should meet with the counsel for implicated parties before Ms. Williams resumes her evidence. The position is that both Ms. Maleka and Mr. Mokoena, who are assisting in the presentation of the evidence of Ms. Williams, would prefer to be present when her evidence continues so that they can render the assistance that they have been rendering to Ms. Hofmeyr.
Okay.
So the preference from the legal team would be, by your leave, if you would consider just allowing the break to take place now, a short break before the evidence resumes.
Okay. How much time do you think would be necessary, Mr. Maleka?
Can I suggest that Ms. Williams continues with evidence immediately, and that during tea break we will discuss such matters as you've directed? We will do so together with our learned friends during the tea break.
Oh, okay. That's rather different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think
well, I'm receiving instructions from Mr. Mokoena there, obviously overridden by Mr. Maleka.
Chair, we would prefer that the evidence of Ms. Williams be concluded without further delay, and thereafter in the course of tea break we will discuss matters that you have suggested we do.
Well, we are at 10:30. If we just took a 30-minute break up to 11, would that not be enough to finalize the issue? And then when we come back, then maybe we might have to do without the tea break and then continue. Ms. Williams, would you be fine with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, all right. I think let's rather take the break now until 11 o'clock, and then we resume. We adjourn.
All right.
have filed applications for permission to cross-examine certain witnesses. I give the following directions in relation to those applications as agreed to among counsel for all concerned who were present at the meeting. The directions are the following. 1, counsel on all sides will file their written submissions with the Secretary of the Commission tomorrow at 10 a.m. I just emphasize that they are to be filed with the Secretary of the Commission. 2, subject to 3 below, the applications which have been filed will be heard on Wednesday this week at 10 a.m. 3, the date for the hearing of these applications is likely to remain Wednesday at 10 a.m., but may be moved to Thursday this week, depending on what transpires in communications between the Commission's legal team and counsel for Mr. Jonas and for Ms. Mentor with regard to whether or not they wish to be or want to be present when the applications are heard. 4, the Commission's legal team will inform me by 12 noon tomorrow as to what will have transpired in their discussions with counsel for the 2 witnesses, so as to enable me to indicate whether the date of Wednesday remains for the hearing of the applications or whether the hearing is moved to Thursday. Those, therefore, are the directions, unless counsel thinks there is something I've left out that I should have included. Mr. Malega?
Chair, can we mention that the directions in 3 and 4 also accommodate the legal representatives of Mr. Maseko?
Oh, okay. The directions in 3 and 4 will include the legal representatives of Mr. Maseko. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Have I covered everything, Mr. Helens?
Yes, we were going to make the Maseko comment, but now it's complete.
Okay, thank you. That then is how we dispose of the applications or matters relating to the applications for now. We will then I'm then ready that we resume the evidence of Ms. Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. One sec, Lerato. Where's my bench book? Yes, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before we continue with the evidence of Ms. Williams, there's one matter of housekeeping that I require to update the Chair on. Chair, that relates to the SMS correspondence that Ms. Williams received in the course of the evidence on Friday.
Yes.
We would like to inform the Chair that we have received an affidavit from Mr. Manyi. It came in the latter part of yesterday, that was the 2nd of September. There is an ongoing investigation by the Commission's investigators, and I understand that a report is being prepared by the investigators.
Yes.
And so it is our proposal that that report be completed, that Mr. Manyi's affidavit be included within that report, and that that be furnished in due course to the Chair as soon as it is ready, in order for the implications of the SMS correspondence for the processes of the Commission to be dealt with.
Okay, that's in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may then return to Ms. Williams's evidence. Ms. Williams, just to pick up on an aspect that we addressed on Friday, which related to a potential difference between your evidence and that of Mr. Maseko regarding the date on which he was removed from GCIS. Chair, you will recall that in the course of that engagement with Ms. Williams, I undertook to go back to the transcript to clarify precisely what Mr. Maseko had said in relation to those dates. And for your benefit and that of Ms. Williams, I would just like to give you the reference. Chair, the relevant part of the transcript is in the transcript of the 30th of August, 2018, and it appears at page 40 of that transcript. And it runs at various points on that page. And rather than read it, what I will do is just summarize the nub of the evidence. What Mr. Maseko testified to was that he'd received the call initially from Minister Chabani on the 30th of January, which was a Sunday. He had then met with him on the Monday, which was the 31st of January. And his actual removal and its notification to the public happened at a cabinet meeting and thereafter media statement by Minister Chabani on Wednesday the 2nd of February. Ms. Williams, you'll recall it was his reference to February that I raised with you in your evidence, because your statement had said that the removal happened on or about January 2011. Do you have a comment on that date in relation to the clarity that we now have from Mr. Maseko's evidence?
Chairperson, I did go and verify the facts. It's true that the address by Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi subsequently was on the 2nd of February, and I would concur with that.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
I'm sorry, she says the address.
The addressing of the management meeting.
Oh.
Remember, I indicated that Mr. Maseko came in that mid-morning, which I wasn't certain of the time.
Yes.
However, I wasn't, my affidavit was indicating that it was around January.
Yes.
Now, what I have since established that it did take place, but it was on the 2nd, and also the subsequent arrival of Mr. Manyi, it was on the 2nd later in the day.
Okay, I think what confused me is the reference to the address. I think when we talk about the departure of Mr. Maseko from the department and Mr. Manyi's arrival, that's what we were talking about, I think. You say that day when Mr. Maseko departed from the department and when Mr. Manyi arrived, you now say that date is in terms of the version given by Mr. Maseko.
Certainly, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, if I may then ask you in Exhibit F1 to go to your statement at page 7, as that is where we left off on Friday. Ms. Williams, you'll recall that when we left off on Friday, we were discussing the ruling that you'd received from the Public Service Commission. That is referenced at paragraph 26 on page 7. But at the time that we adjourned on Friday, we were dealing with the actual content of that ruling. And so if I may ask you to go to page 56 of the papers, which is the 12th page of that ruling from the Public Service Commission. And just to orientate ourselves in your evidence, Ms. Williams, as I understand the position, the ruling from the Public Service Commission was a product of a grievance that you raised with them in relation to the fact that you had, in your acting position as Cabinet spokesperson, been in a position on a level 16 for more than 6 weeks, and as a consequence of that had sought remuneration commensurate with that position. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And you took up the issue with the Public Service Commission, as I understand your evidence, when Minister Mutambi refused to remunerate you on level 16. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
We dealt with some of the findings of the Public Service Commission on Friday, but what appears at page 56 is really the conclusion of their finding in relation to your grievance in relation to level 16. If you go 2/3 of the way down in that paragraph 29.8, you will see that the ruling records, taking into consideration that Ms. Williams had been performing the role of Cabinet spokesperson, which should be performed by the Director General of GCIS, it is accepted that she performed on level 16. Furthermore, both Ministers Radebe and Mutambi signed the performance agreement of Ms. Williams reflecting the salary level as 16, thereby contracting to her performance on that salary level. Ms. Williams, what did the Public Service Commission conclude, therefore, in relation to that finding?
Chairperson, the conclusion was that indeed, whilst working as an acting cabinet spokesperson, I was on level 16 and therefore should be compensated accordingly.
Ms. Hofmeyr, unless the idea is that some of these details show that, for example, certain people did certain things because of anything connected with either state capture or corruption and fraud. It would seem to me that some of these might be quite important to a particular witness, but might not really be relevant or significant for purposes of the commission. So I just want to make sure that you keep an eye on that. You know, obviously, if in the end the argument is going to be that the failure, for example, by Ms. Mutambi or whoever to make sure that she was paid at the correct rate shows a certain motive that's relevant for our terms of reference, the detail would not be relevant.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes.
If I may address that pertinently, because there has been aspects of Ms. Williams's evidence which on their face do not directly relate to the questions that the Chair has posed. But I would like to address it, if I may, because you'll recall that my learned leader, Mr. Maleka, explained at the beginning of his introduction to the term of reference 1.6 that we were going to receive evidence first from Mr. Maseko, who was going to speak directly to his removal from the head, the position of head of GCIS, and then to be followed by the evidence of Ms. Williams, who is going to speak as the person who has been in that institution, I would suspect for the longest time, of how that institution was carried forward after Mr. Maseko's departure, and particularly how that institution thereafter facilitated payments of advertising spend for national departments to the Gupta-linked media entities of TNA Media, etc. So that is where Ms. Williams, in the chronology, is placed in her evidence. But Chair, we submit that the details of the management of GCIS is more generally relevant to the terms of reference of this commission. And if I may just direct the Chair to some of the evidence that we received from the experts on Friday afternoon. Ms. Williams, I'm not sure that you remained for that evidence. Did you stay?
No.
It will be relevant because I will actually ask for you to comment on this in due course in your evidence. But one of the important points that were made by those experts, Dr. Hellman and Dr. Kaufman, is that one of the ways in which, in their research over the better part of 20 years into the phenomenon of state capture, that it takes place in a society is when institutions are denuded of their efficiency and where the governance of those institutions is undermined. It is in the context of that damage to the institutions of a state that the ground for state capture is made available and becomes fertile. And Chair, in due course, not through Ms. Williams, but in due course, we will address the Chair on precisely the institutional deficiencies that have occurred across the board of the institutions in our state and the governance that has been undermined, provided we can show that that links to the state capture, corruption and fraud, which are the main focus of the Commission. So, Chair, with your leave at this point, we are seeking simply to get the detail of what happened to the institution of GCIS after Mr. Maseko left, after Mr. Manyi came in, after he was replaced by Mr. Dipoko, and under the stewardship of Minister Mutambi. We will glean those facts as we have from Ms. Williams, and we will look at the question of whether the governance of that institution was undermined in a manner that facilitated payments to Gupta-linked entities that were otherwise untoward.
Okay, no, that's fine. As long as you keep an eye on relevance and significance.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, Chair, we intend to do so.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Williams, there is a ruling that you should be paid at level 16. What happened? Were you paid at that level?
Chairperson, I was not paid.
And then if you go to page 57, there is furthermore a ruling from the Public Service Commission at paragraph 31.4 that the filling of the post of Director General of GCIS must receive priority, and the Public Service Commission must be informed of the finalization thereof. And they make reference earlier to the period of 6 months in terms of which their circular required that position to be filled. Did that take place?
No, Chairperson, the post was not filled.
If we can then return to your statement, Ms. Williams, at page 8.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Yes.
That letter from the Commission is dated 1 February 2016.
That's correct, Chair.
Now, that post wasn't filled up to the time that you were appointed, or are you still acting? I can't remember anymore now. Are you still acting?
I'm still acting, Chairperson.
So that post remains unfilled?
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Chair, if we may just assist, we are now in February 2016. At that stage, Ms. Williams, what position did you hold in GCIS?
2016, I would have to check.
If you go back, and I may be of assistance, I don't regard this as being contentious. As I have it, you were acting cabinet spokesperson, but
That's
you were
correct.
no longer acting DG. You had returned to your position as Deputy Director General. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson. I was still the acting cabinet spokesperson at that time.
And who was holding the position of acting DG of GCIS at that time?
It was Mr. Donald Dipuka.
Thank you. Insofar as the failure on the part of Minister Mutambi to follow the recommendation of the Public Service Commission to pay you at level 16, do you know why that recommendation was not implemented by the Minister?
Chairperson, I have no idea, because my understanding was that the Public Service Commission is an institution that actually would give a ruling, and a political principal should actually adhere to the recommendation.
And the further recommendation that the post of Director General of GCIS finally be filled, because on the chronology as I have it until this point, since Mr. Maseko left in February 2011, there had been no appointment of a Director General of GCIS. Do you have insight as to why no steps were taken on the part of the Minister to advertise and fill that position finally?
Just to correct, I think the post became vacant when Mr. Manyi left, which was August 2012.
Correct.
But I have no idea why it has not been filled.
So that post has remained vacant for about 6 years. That's very strange. That's very strange. For 6 years.
Ms. Williams?
Yeah.
What does that do to an institution such as GCIS to have that failure to fill a position at the head of the institution?
Chairperson, my understanding is that the Public Finance Management Act does provide that a department must have an accounting officer. And the implication indeed is that you have an institution that has an acting person who has not been appointed, and necessarily you don't have a full-time accounting officer as prescribed by the PFMA. So it does have an impact in terms of the leadership of that institution.
Well, you have acted in the position and you have been Deputy Director General for a number of years at GCIS. Does the post of Director General of GCIS require any skills or expertise that is difficult to find in the country?
Chairperson, my understanding is that I don't think it's a specialized, it's a post that you require a person with good governance and the communication skill and understanding of the policies of the department. So in my view, it's not a scarce skill. I think, Chairperson, if I may say, I think what was even particularly frustrating is the fact that even when you are acting, you then get bullied throughout the process, almost rendering, even with you having the capacity to perform, you then continuously get bullied, that you almost finding it difficult to perform.
Well, you have been DG for some time and you have been within government for many years, and you have acted as DG as well. Would the President be unaware that, for example, there is a department that has had no DG for many years? Is that something you are able to say, or is that something you are not able to say?
Chairperson, I'm able to say it for the simple reason that year in and year out, the Auditor General has been raising concern about it. And it was continuously raised with the relevant minister who was in place at that time. It was raised with Minister Mtambi, it was raised with the previous minister, so I am aware that it is something that was continuously raised by the Auditor General.
But you don't know to what extent a president would be unaware of a vacant position of a DG if it continues for a long time.
Chairperson, my understanding is that the president of the country should be aware, for a simple reason that as a cabinet spokesperson, you sit in cabinet, you continuously are addressed as an acting. So my understanding is that the president was very much aware that there was no Director General of the GCIS.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just pick up this point in relation to the regulations that govern GCIS, because it is again a feature of what happened after Mr. Maseko's departure from GCIS and the manner in which it was managed for a period of 6 or so years thereafter. Could I ask you to go to page 163 of the papers? Chair and Ms. Williams, this is a portion of the Public Service Commission regulations.
I'm sorry, what page did you say?
163. Just to orientate you, Ms. Williams, the Public Service Regulations of 2016 begin at page 94 of the papers, and I've directed you to a particular page within those regulations at page 163. If you flip back a page at page 162, you will see that that is the regulation dealing with advertising of posts within the public service. And if you go over the page to regulation 65 sub 7, you will see there the stipulation that a funded vacant post shall be advertised within 6 months after becoming vacant and shall be filled within 12 months after becoming vacant. Now, Ms. Williams, before I ask for your comment on that, Chair, just to satisfy you, the preceding regulations, which were in place prior to 2016, had a similar provision. They are published in Government Gazette 70322, in Notice R111 of the 8th of February 2018. But the equivalent provision can be found there. So it operated throughout the period that we are concerned with. Ms. Williams, is that your understanding of the position of the public service, that these positions must be advertised within 6 months and must be filled within 12?
That's my understanding, Chairperson. I think that's why I was saying that the Auditor General has been consistently raising a finding around this matter.
Has the Auditor General's report raising this matter been simply ignored, as far as you know?
What I know is that the post has not been filled, Chairperson.
Yes.
And the political principals that were responsible at the time, they are aware of the report that was raised by the Auditor General.
Yes. Now you are acting in the position. Are you privy to any reasons or explanations why, as of today, the post has not been advertised?
I am not privy, Chair.
And as far as you know, and you ought to know, being the acting DG, are there any plans in place to have the post advertised anytime soon?
Chairperson, I wouldn't really speak on that. I'm not aware of.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, before we move to the next topic of your evidence, I'd like to ask for your comment on page 70 of your 70.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer, to interrupt. Let me just finish something that's connected with my last question. During your acting period as DG now, what happens to your position of Deputy Director General? Is there somebody else acting in that position, and is it somebody who is within GCIS, or is it somebody from outside? In other words, what's the impact on the functioning of the department of the fact that this post has not been filled and you have to act in that post, and then maybe somebody else must act in your position? I don't know whether somebody else must act in that other person's position and somebody else must act in that other person's position. What is the position?
Chairperson, if I can just take a step back, when I was moved back to be the acting cabinet spokesperson, one of my letters to the minister in accepting, I had indicated that if she could appoint somebody in the corporate services as a DDG. Now, for that duration, nobody was giving leadership in that branch up until my acting was stopped. Currently, the current minister has appointed me as an acting cabinet acting director general, but she has also appointed an acting DDG in that. However, the chief director for the human resources is doubling up. There's no one who has been appointed because he has moved, Mr. Smakane has moved to the position that I had, but then we can't appoint a person because it is a funded chief director post. So the person is doubling up in that area.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, in relation to that last answer, what is the impact on the morale of the institution of GCIS with this moving and doubling up and uncertainty as to the filling of formal positions?
Chairperson, if I may just say that the damage that was done by the Minister Mtambi, for a very long time, GCIS was called a Hollywood place, because a lot of people, when they resigned, and I should indicate that one of the other things that Minister Mtambi did, took over the powers of appointing people. When the post becomes vacant, it has to be at her whims whether she fills the post or not. So from directors, we had a lot of directors that were vacant, we had a lot of chief directors that were vacant, all the DDGs that were there had left, and basically the institution was becoming completely dysfunctional. The current the next minister who took over, Minister Dlodlo, credit to her, she managed to fill those posts because most of the directors that were had left, she just didn't fill them. So the Minister Dlodlo, who then came, fast-tracked filling those posts, but up till now, we still don't have the DDGs, but the chief directors and the directors were then filled by the next minister, which was Minister Ayanda Dlodlo.
And just to get our chronology clear, Ms. Williams, can I clarify? You were demoted, as I have it from the chronology, from the position of acting DG in October 2014, and that is the date on which Mr. Dipoko took over from you as acting DG. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that position persisted, as I have it from your chronology, until April 2017, where you were placed back in the acting position by the current Minister Dlodlo. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So from the period October 2014 to April 2017, Mr. Dipoko was in that position as acting head of GCIS, and you were in a Deputy Director General position. Is that correct?
At some point, I was a Deputy Director General, then I was appointed as an acting cabinet spokesperson.
Indeed, but without ever reassuming the position of Director General of GCIS. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Thank you. I then asked Ms. Williams that you turn to page 70 of the papers, of Exhibit F1, which is your bundle. It's part of the theme that we're exploring at the moment with you, Ms. Williams, what the role of the head of an institution like GCIS entails, and how the failure to fill that position impacted on the institution. Page 70 is a section of the Public Service Act, and you will see in the middle of the page, under subsection 7.3, 3B, the roles of the head of department of a national department are set out there. I'd like to go through them with you and with reference to them, invite your comment on the impact of this period where there was no formal head of GCIS in the position. You'll see that section 7.3b says, subject to the provisions of paragraph C and D, which are not pertinent for present purposes, a head of a department shall be responsible for the efficient management and administration of his or her department, including the effective utilization and training of staff, the maintenance of discipline, the promotion of sound labor relations, and the proper use and care of state property, and he or she shall perform the functions that may be prescribed. Can you tell us with comment on those sections what the impact was on the GCIS?
Chairperson, if I may describe the situation at the time, I think the organization was working on auto, precisely because we were fortunate that we have an organization of very, very dedicated public servants. They knew their work and they were actually doing the work as committed public servant. If you were asking me whether were they getting any strategic direction from the head, I would say no. There was no strategic leadership at all whatsoever.
Thank you. If we may then return to page 8 of the Exhibit F1. You will see at the top of that page, at paragraph 27, you record the fact that Minister Mutambi never implemented the Public Service Commission's recommendations, and you go on to say, instead, she reversed my responsibilities as Cabinet spokesperson in April 2016, and she directed that you revert back to your previous portfolio. What portfolio was that?
Chairperson, that portfolio is the portfolio that I left to be the acting cabinet spokesperson, and in April, she then wrote me a letter to say, revert back to your role as the Deputy Director General of Corporate Services.
Ms. Williams, you take up at paragraph 28 on that page steps that you took in the face of that conduct by Minister Mutambi. Please could you tell the Chair about those steps?
Chairperson, at that point, because clearly I think Minister Mutambi, that was in April, and the letter from the Public Service Commission had been given to us as early as February, and she was not interested in implementing the recommendations. I then took up the matter with the President, because the report I was made to believe by the Public Service Commission has also been sent to the President, because the Minister was accountable to the President. I then made an effort to communicate with the President with a view of requesting his intervention, that I be compensated for the period that I was acting.
And what was the President's response?
In this second round, he never gave me the appointment.
And just to go back to a question that the Chair asked you earlier, the Chair queried whether, to your knowledge, Minister Mutambi's failure to fill the vacant post of head of GCIS was brought to the President's attention, or her requirement in terms of the Public Service Commission ruling to do so within 6 months of February 2016. To your knowledge, did the ruling of the Public Service Commission go to the President for his consideration?
I was advised by the Public Service Commission that a copy was sent to me, another copy was sent to the Minister, and another copy was sent to the President.
Thank you. If we can then return to paragraph 29 on page 8. Ms. Williams, in paragraphs 29 and 30, you talk about the next change that occurred to your responsibilities within GCIS after you were instructed by Minister Mutambi to resume the position of Deputy Director General. Please can you tell us about that further change that occurred in August 2016?
Chairperson, when I went back to my portfolio that I was hired to do, that was in April, and one morning I get to the office and I find another letter And this time, it was a letter that was informing me that the minister has directed Mr. Dipoko to take most of my functions as the Deputy Director General.
Where were they taken?
The functions were taken to the Director General, who was acting at the time.
That would be Mr. Dipoko.
Mr. Dipoko, yes.
If we could go to that letter, it's at page 39 of Exhibit F1. Can you confirm that this is an internal memo from Mr. Dipoko to yourself dated the 1st of August 2016? Apologies, it's page 39.
39, yeah, that's right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you received this?
I received this, Chairperson.
If we can go to paragraph 1, Mr. Dipoko records that in line with the Treasury regulations, clauses 2.1.2 and 3.2.9 issued in terms of the PFMA, he records the minister directed the acting director general that the below mentioned functions must report directly to the office of the accounting officer. I'd like to look at that in some detail. Let's begin with who occupied the office of accounting officer at that time in GCIS.
The accounting officer at the time was Mr. Dipoko.
Right, then I'd like us to focus on his recordal that the minister has directed, as I understand it, him, Mr. Dipoko, to do certain things. What do you make of the minister's direction to Mr. Dipoko that there must be some rearrangement within the functions of GCIS?
Chairperson, my understanding of the PFMA, the minister doesn't get involved in the running of the department. That in itself was odd to me. For the accounting officer to say he is acting on an instruction on something that should have belonged to him, but he then says that the minister is saying, this is what I should instruct you to do, was a bit almost wrong, Chairperson.
And then if we go on to understand the content of that instruction, the instruction was that, and I quote, the below mentioned functions must report directly to the office of the accounting officer. And then listed first in the sub-paragraph is the chief financial officer. Who was that at the time in GCIS?
The chief financial officer, Chairperson, was Mr. Zweli Momeko.
And can I ask about the processes in place in August 2016 when you received this internal memorandum? What was the process for the Chief Financial Officer to report to the Acting Director General in the period prior to this memo being received by yourself? Were they engaging? Weren't they? If they were, what was the relevant regularity of that engagement?
My understanding, Chairperson, of the role of the CFO as provided for in the public financial management is that the CFO should be accountable to the accounting officer, which is the DG, not report necessarily. And what used to happen in our case was that the accounting officer at all time had a line of sight of the CFO through a monthly budget committee meeting, which he chairs, the DG chairs. This is what was happening during Mr. Joel Nechitenze. This is how it was happening during Themba Maseko. And this is how it was happening also with Mr. Manyi. The DG is receiving reports on a monthly basis in a setting of the budget committee from the chief financial officer. So there was never any stage where the chief financial officer is not reporting the expenditure of the department to the accounting officer.
So, at a practical level, what change would this direction of the minister bring about then?
Chairperson, what it meant and I will list them, I hope I remember all of them. It meant the cleaners report to the Director General. It meant the security.
I'm sorry?
The cleaners were reporting directly to the Director General because that whole portfolio was reporting under a CFO because we were a small department. So when they took that function, it therefore meant the cleaners were reporting to the Director General, the registry was reporting to the Director General, the supply chain, which was the procurement, was reporting to the salaries, were reporting to the DG, the transport services was reporting to the DG, the auxiliary service, the asset management, all of that was just directly reporting to the Director General, which is why I was saying that the bulk of the work of the Deputy Director General was removed under the guise of this Treasury regulation.
So the Chief Financial Officer's office, if that's what one can call it, has a number of components, is that right, or sections?
Certainly, Chairman.
And those are the ones you were mentioning.
Yes.
You are saying that this direction recorded in Mr. Dipogo's letter at page 39, or memo, internal memo at page 39, meant what you have just said as far as you understood it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Williams, if I may just clarify, prior to this internal memo, who was overseeing those functions?
It was myself, Chairperson.
For want of a better description, a middle management level.
I was a middle manager. I was a Deputy Director General responsible for that whole corporate services portfolio, which included the CFO.
And just to clarify further, before this internal memo, there was, I think in your words, a line of sight consistently between the Chief Financial Officer and the Director General. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
That happened consistently, and despite that, in August 2016, there was an instruction from Minister Mutambi that those aspects which you had formerly been responsible for as Deputy Director General now exclude you and report directly to the then acting Director General, Mr. Lipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
If we can then return to page 8 of your statement.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. Before you received this internal memo from Mr. Dipoko, was there any process in terms of which you were engaged either by the minister or Mr. Dipoko to say it was felt there was a need to effect this change, and what was your view and so on?
Chairperson, I did raise precisely those issues because in my understanding, you don't just wake up one morning and you change and you don't engage the people who are concerned. I was never consulted. The sections that were moving, they just woke up one morning and were told that they are no longer. So there was no consultation, hence my elevating my grievance on this matter.
And this was not at the time when you were acting spokesperson, government spokesperson, and you had asked that somebody else should take care of your position.
That's correct, Chairperson. I was back in my position as the Deputy Director General.
Yes. And what were you left with after the implementation of this direction from Minister Mutambi in terms of your responsibilities?
I was left with human resources administration, and I was left with human resource development, strategic planning, and the IT.
You must have asked for a reason why this change was made. If you did ask, what reason were you given?
First, I wrote a letter, Chairperson, to the Minister. And to try and raise those issues to say, I mean, there should have been a process. The starting, as I recall, the starting line was that I thought you have left. I'm surprised you are still there because I was told you have left. And in any case, it's my right to, I have instructed, and it is my right as a minister.
Or I guess maybe something you're still going to come to.
Indeed, Chair. If I
Okay.
may take us to that correspondence, because I
Okay.
think it will assist
Yes,
with
just
the-
before you do that, Ms. Williams, I see that internal memo from Mr. Tipuko is dated 19 August 2016, but paragraph 4 of the memo says that the implementation of the direction or directive, he calls it, was to be with effect from 1 August 2016. Do you know whether the reason why on the 19th August 2016, Mr. Tipuko said this change would occur with effect from 1 August 2016, about close to 3 weeks previously, retrospectively? Do you know why that was, or whether that was connected with the fact that already the change had been implemented before the memo was written?
Chairperson, that's exactly what I had also noted, that the letter was dated the 1st of August.
19?
First, and then signed on the 19th.
Oh, okay.
It was signed on the 19th, but it looks like it had been written a while back and kept, and maybe waiting for the right time, and then it was given to me on the 19th. But it was saying retrospectively.
Yes.
I didn't know what it means, because I had been managing that section from the 1st to the 19th. I didn't know what the status of the things that I've signed between that time, whether they are irregular or I will be discharged for signing things. I didn't know. I didn't quite understand it.
Or maybe what happened is it was prepared on the 1st of August, but didn't get ready for signing until much later, or he might not have got time to sign it until much later.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. In fact, one of the things was an internal communication also was moved to his office.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, just to clarify then, when did the change occur? When were these 70% odd of your functions? And we'll come back to that percentage in a moment. But as I understand your statement, you said with effect from this memo and this instruction from Minister Mutambi, effectively 70% of your portfolio was taken away from you. As a matter of fact, when did that occur? Did it happen at the 1st of August, or did it happen after the 19th of August, when this internal memo is dated?
Chairperson, ideally it should have taken effect from the 19th. But I think I want to mention the fact that the situation, or rather my situation, was so bad such that people were being managed individually on their own. They were called to the DG's office. So even if you were to ask me when, they probably were already interacting with my division as they please.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. If we can then go to the correspondence that bears out the evidence that you've given to the Chair about you raising concern with this internal memo. Your letter appears at page 39.1. That is the document which, Chair, I asked on Friday be inserted to the bundle because it had been erroneously omitted.
Yeah.
Ms. Williams, as I see it, this is a letter dated the 27th of September 2016. I note addressed to the Honourable Minister Mutambi. And it is a letter, as I have it, that you sent to her. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you go to the bottom of page 39.1, the last paragraph there, in the preceding paragraphs, you've recorded the internal memo that you received, and you have referenced the instruction that is apparent from that internal memo that Mr. Dipoko received from the Minister. And you go on in the last paragraph, and I quote, to say the following: whilst I appreciate that the prerogative of rearranging the department's functions resides with the Minister, I expect it to be treated fairly in conveying the Minister's decision. It is my understanding that when the conditions of employment change, the employee should be consulted. And then you say, I was never consulted. Do you confirm that?
Yes, I confirm that.
You go on over the page, Ms. Williams, page 39.2, to talk about these 72% of your functions that were removed from you. Can you please give the Chair a sense of what that meant for your position? And I note later on in the letter you talk about it having rendered it redundant. Please take us through that.
Chairperson, what it meant, I hope I'll get it right, I'll say it correctly. I was being paid as a Deputy Director General for doing all these functions that were not happening to me. And yeah, I think, Chairperson, if you allow me to say what I want to say, I think if you indulge me, because I think at this point, I think Minister Mtambi, or rather this woman, I'm really being sorry to say what I want to say. Minister Mtambi had ripped my scars of torture completely. I think when I was writing this letter, the effects of my torture were back. Chairperson, I was no longer sleeping. I had nightmares. I was reliving my situation. My facial twitches were back. I had panic attacks. I saw torture going through my body again. I never thought in this government people can do such things. I was tortured for weeks, and Mtambi did the same thing to my body. And that's why I wrote this letter, as a way of trying to get her to understand what she was doing. One, she was cheating the state, because basically I was being paid because she wanted that procurement at all costs. She wanted to steal at all costs. That removing of all those functions, it was a ploy to remove the finance and procurement away from me. They knew that they have removed me from doing cabinet work. I was going to be a nuisance, and they decided that the procurement and the finances must be removed from this woman. And that's basically what they did. I had to contend with those scars back in my system. I couldn't say to anyone what I was going through. I had to be assisted by colleagues at work, Mr. Simakane and Zukiswa, who made it their problem that every morning they come and check on me. My sister had to move in my house, because at that point I was scared of going to bed because I thought the nightmares will come back. I started hearing those keys of my torture. That's all.
Ms. Williams, if you need a break,
Please.
yes, we'll take a break. Will 10 minutes be enough?
That's fine.
Okay, we'll take a 10 minutes break. It's the time is 6 minutes past 12. Okay, I'll just say we'll come back at 20 past 12.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. doing what you say Minister Mutambi was doing to you as another torture. So I wasn't sure before the break whether to ask you more, but you have now referred to something about being required to turn into an askari or whatever. I don't know if there's anything you would like to say about that.
Chairperson, I was an ANC activist. I was arrested in 1998. And that
1998?
was 1988, sorry.
1988?
88.
Okay.
And I had to go through weeks of torture because they wanted me to turn against my comrades at the time. And I should say that I was arrested by a former ANC MK cadre called September. I was arrested in Soweto, but I was tortured in Piet Retief. Chairperson, throughout my life, I've never ever thought I would have to relive that situation because it was never a nice experience. But I think the effects of my torture, which I had thought would never ever have to come back, I found myself having those facial twitches which came as a result of torture. I found myself having to go through those panic attacks at night where you wake up shivering, thinking you had a cell being open, and you then don't fall asleep immediately after that. You think they are coming, and they don't come. And in the morning, you then wake up and you have to go to work. And you get to the office, you can't tell anyone, this is what you are going through. I had those panic attacks, which even a car in the street, when it was, a hoot, would just trigger it. And all those symptoms, Chairperson, they had already gone because I had to go through medication and everything. But I found myself slipping through to that situation where I had to get the medication again. And that's the experience that I had thought was sealed in my heart. It would never have to be reopened. But little did I realize that it will be opened by the very same people who call themselves comrade, the same people who claim to be from the ANC that I was from also. And they are the ones who did this to me. I think I was almost shattered. But Chairperson, as I said, that the reason I withdrew my retirement, I had to ask myself a question: how did I manage the torture and not to sell, and ended up being sentenced to 7 years? What is it? And I think, Chairperson, I came with one conclusion, that the reason I couldn't sell out is because I was so passionate with what I was struggling for. And I was also accepting the fact that these are not my friends, these are the boys that are coming to torture me. But in the case of public service, I had to accept that this is not a minister, this is an enemy. That's what really helped me. I don't think that woman was interested in serving the people of South Africa. I don't think that woman was interested in preserving the resources of this country. And that's why I then said that I will be failing the people of South Africa if I allow the thief to get away with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, you gave notice of the withdrawal of your early retirement, as I have it at page 60 on the 5th of September. And then if you go over the page to page 61, that appears to be an acknowledgement of receipt of the withdrawal of your retirement from Mr. Dipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
And could you please read into the record what he says at paragraph 2 of that acknowledgement of receipt of the withdrawal of your retirement?
The last line says, your continued dedication to the work of GCIS is appreciated.
If I may then go back to your correspondence with the Minister. Because as I have it in the chronology, you put in the notice of early retirement. You then withdraw it a matter of days later, and that is acknowledged on the 5th of September 2016 by Mr. Dipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Your letter of grievance to the Minister, which we looked at a moment ago, which is at page 39.1, is then dated later in September. It's the 27th of September 2016.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
The one that's dated, it's 40, page 40?
No, 39.1 should be 2 pages back, and that, as I have it, is your letter to the Minister
That's correct.
after the early retirement and withdrawal.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's right.
And this is the one we were looking at before the adjournment,
Okay.
where you take up the issue of redundancy. 70-odd% of your functions have been removed, and it was done so without consultation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then if you go over the page to page 40, you have Minister Mutambi's, as I read this document, response to your letter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you tell us over the page at page 41 the date of that document from Minister Mutambi?
It's on the 5th of October, 2016.
At paragraph 1 on page 40, she deals with what she thought was your departure from GCIS. Can you take us through what she says there?
I have noted the contents of your letter dated the 27th of September 2016 on the above subject. I am surprised to receive your grievance after having considered your letter of termination of services with GCIS dated 31st of August, which I directed the acting DG to accept.
That appears not to have happened.
I didn't.
Do you know why?
Chairperson, I had already withdrawn my early retirement. In fact, I didn't even resign, as she seems to be understood, because my notice was a notice to apply for the early retirement. I did not resign. I don't know what was she talking about.
Ms. Williams?
I'm sorry. So she may have understood your notice of early retirement as meaning that you were resigning.
Yes, Chairperson, and probably she even bought a champagne. And
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, at paragraph 2 of the Minister's letter,
I'm sorry again, Ms. Hofmeyer. If you resign and if you occupy the position of Deputy Director General and you resign, who is supposed to accept your resignation to the extent that one needs to talk about an acceptance of resignation? Is it the DG? Is it the Minister? Is it the President? Who is it?
it's supposed to be the Director General, not her.
Thank you.
thank you, Chair. At paragraph 2 on page 40, the Minister deals with her reasons for stripping you of 70% of your functions and ensuring that you were, in essence, and these are my words, excommunicated from the reporting line between the CFO and the then acting DG of the time. Who was the CFO at the time that these functions were removed from you?
It was Mr. Zweli Momeko.
Is he the same Mr. Momeko whom you testified about on Friday, having bullied the supply chain management representatives within GCIS in August 2014 about the payment to TNA Media for the SABC breakfast?
Yes, Chairperson, it's the same person.
And as I read paragraph 2, and you'll tell me if I'm incorrect, the Minister is grounding her decision to take these functions from you in Treasury Regulations 2.1.1, 2.1.2, and 2.1.3. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
What did you make of her explanation based on these regulations for taking 70% of your functions away?
Chairperson, I think the Minister doesn't even seem to understand that those Treasury regulations have got a subsequent documentation that Treasury provided, which is called a CFO handbook. It goes to explain the essence of what the Treasury regulation is saying, that it seeks to ensure that the accounting officer of a department has a line of sight with a budget that he or she has been entrusted with. And in our case, we had that line of sight as prescribed by National Treasury, and it was in the form of a budget committee. The Director General, on a monthly basis, without fail, he would convene a CFO together with the 3 DDGs and engage. It was not even a separate part of the management meeting, but it was a separate dedicated to discuss the finances. So there was a line of sight as expected by the PFMA.
Ms. Williams, I note from paragraph 2 of the Minister's letter that she doesn't refer to clause 3.2.9 of the Treasury regulations. If you go back to page 39, you will see that at page 39, when Mr. Dipoko advised you of this rearrangement of your functions, he said that he had been directed by the Minister in terms of clauses 2.1.2 and 3.2.9 to require this direct engagement between himself and the CFO. Do you know why the Minister omitted clause 3.2.9 from her letter at page 40?
I don't know, Chair.
Do you know what clause 3.2.9 of the Treasury regulation says?
I would have to be reminded.
Indeed, and maybe if you will permit me, I'll do so. Regulation 3.2.9 says an internal audit must be independent with no limitation on its access to information. Ms. Williams, on what basis could that have been a reason to remove your functions from you?
Chairperson, maybe I should even have said that. I think the other day when I was presenting, the Chief Internal Auditor had been removed by Mr. Manyi. It's one of the first functions that he decided to take and be responsible for the media buying and the internal audit. So at this point, the internal audit was no longer reporting to me, it was reporting to Mr. Manyi. So I would imagine that probably they picked up that they made a mistake and that's why they didn't make reference to it.
Thank you. If you go over the page to page 41, this is the second page of the Minister's letter. At paragraph 4, she deals with your concern about the redundancy that had now resulted pursuant to her instruction that all of these functions be removed from you. And she records there, and I quote at paragraph 4, on the part of redundancy, it cannot be correct that the changes have resulted in the redundancy of your position because your conditions of service have not been negatively affected. However, you will agree with me that that financial management and supply chain management are core functions of the Chief Financial Officer. Could we break that up into 2 parts? That section before the however, what do you make of the Minister's contention that this wasn't an issue of redundancy because your conditions of service had not been negatively affected?
Chairperson, the response by the Minister actually shocked me because it has no regard whatsoever of the taxpayers' money. To her, it's not a problem to continue to pay me for doing almost like 30% of the work that I was being paid, and to her, it's okay. It doesn't matter. We haven't tampered with your salary, but you can continue doing less because it's not her money. It's the taxpayers' money, and that's what shocked me.
And then she goes on in the second part of that sentence to solicit an agreement from you that the Financial management and supply chain management are core functions of the Chief Financial Officer. Do you agree with her, and did you agree with her, that those functions should no longer appropriately be reporting to you?
Chairperson, I don't agree, because I don't think Minister, together with head acting DG, took the trouble to understand how the organization is structured. It was not about CFO, it was not about supply chain, it was a whole suite, which is how we were structured. And if they had bothered themselves to consult me, I probably would have explained it to them that those functions don't strictly fall within the regulation that they are quoting. And secondly, it is not possible, it's not correct that the CFO is not accountable to the accounting officer, because at the time, from 1998, the CFO has been accounting to the DG. So the whole thing, you could see that it's just an attempt to get this supplier chain and the finances to be in the hands of somebody that they can manipulate.
Ms. Hofmeyr, just one more clarification. You were asked, Ms. Williams, for your comment on Minister Mutambi's paragraph 4, where she said that the changes had not affected your conditions of service, and your response was limited to the fact that you said she seemed not to have any concern that you were being paid a full salary for doing 30% of the duties attached to your post. What do you say about her assertion that the changes did not affect your conditions of service?
Thank you very much, Chair, for bringing me back. I think I did attach my letter of appointment, which I did point out that it changes my conditions of employment, because my letter dated the 8th of May 2009 had the whole suite of these things. So it's necessarily, it was changing my conditions of employment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, if we can return to your statement then at page 9 of Exhibit F1. Ms. Williams, at paragraph 32 on that page, you talk about an event in July 2016 where you were invited to an interview by Minister Mutambi in her office on the 14th of July. Please can you take the chair through those events?
Chairperson, I received a correspondence from the minister's office where they were inviting me for an interview of the post of the deputy of the Director General. Yeah.
And if you go to page 42 of Exhibit F1, is that the invitation you received?
Yes, Chairperson, that's the one.
And what was your response to that invitation?
Chairperson, what I indicated is that, firstly, I had not applied for the post. At that point, I had not applied. Secondly, I have never been invited for an interview by a chief of staff. The way I understand human resources in the GCIS, the head of human resources is the one that will invite you. So necessarily, I then responded to say I have not applied and I am not interested in the invitation.
And to your knowledge, was that interview process ever concluded and an appointment made?
I don't know. All I know is that the post is still vacant, and the GCIS human resources, which I was responsible for human resources, was never ever contacted. So nobody knew about this whole attempt for these interviews. Human resources was not responsible. I don't know what happened to that interview process.
Did you get to know whether there were any other candidates who were invited to interviews at the same time or more or less around that time for the same position?
In fact, Chairperson, I can even say before I even responded, I did phone HR, and they were blank. They were not aware of anything. So I don't even know who applied, who shortlisted, who the candidate was, and I don't know anything about that. But all I know is that the post is still vacant now.
How was your relationship with Minister Mutambi around the time of this invitation?
It was strained. She was not interacting with me at all. She was interacting with the acting Director General.
Well, Ms. Hofmeyer will tell me if it's something she is still coming to. I just find it strange if you have a situation where you have a strained relationship, she invites you for an interview for promotion, and nobody else is invited, is shortlisted or will be interviewed for the position. On the face of it, leave out the question of whether proper procedures are followed. It appears that you are being offered an opportunity to be the only candidate. Do you understand what I mean? I don't know whether you want to comment on this line of thinking that I'm having at the moment.
Chairperson, that's precisely why I didn't apply, because I had strained relations. I wasn't quite sure how she proposes to work with me. At that time, she was not even interacting with me. So I think that's basically what my view was, that I don't see why I should be applying for this post.
Yeah. And you never got to know what the reason behind was for you being the only person being invited to an interview and no one else?
Chairperson, I don't know whether there were other people. Yes. All I know is that I got a letter. It may be that they did have other people, I don't know, but human resources also did not know.
Oh, but did you say that the normal procedure would be that the Human Resources Department would know of other candidates?
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. In relation to that process for advertising, Ms. Williams, I referred you earlier to the regulations, the public service regulations that talk about advertisements for posts within the public administration. Do you understand that those advertisements have to take place in an open and transparent manner? And do you have details about what must happen in the advertising process that you can enlighten us on?
Chairperson, the way I will explain it the way we do it currently in the GCIS. When a post becomes vacant, we advertise it in the main newspapers, which is prescribed, and when the advert closes, we then appoint a selection committee, which then processes all the applications and try and shortlist the ones that are close enough to the requirements. And on the basis of that, the chairperson of the evaluation committee will then decide who are the 3 that will then be interviewed. But there's generally a prior setting up of these structures. Once the advert is out, the evaluation committee is appointed in writing, and the panel that will interview is also signed off. It is a panel that gets signed off. So that whole process, I wasn't aware of it. And even at a Director General level, the human resources in GCIS or in the department participates in that shortly. It ensures that the ministers set up an evaluation committee, because even there at a DG level, there should be an evaluation committee. Even if it's the same committee that ends up interviewing, it has to be appointed formally, and then they agree on the shortlisted candidates, and then they invite. That whole secretariat process is done by the head of HR. and also on the day of the interviews, in terms of the procedure, the head of HR sits and becomes a scribe for those interviews. And in this particular case, it was not done that way.
I don't know whether one can speak of headhunting somebody within a department. Is it not that you are being headhunted? And if you are headhunted, do those procedures that you have just said, do they apply?
Chairperson, even if you are headhunted, as the process as I know it, you can't be headhunted alone. There should be some kind of a process, and human resources normally drives that process. It will headhunt maybe 3 or 4 candidates and then put them into a shortlisted, but the committee still should exist, and the committee that interviews should still exist, and the head of HR should form part of the secretariat of that process.
Oh, I thought that the concept of headhunting, where it does apply, it's where a minister or whoever is the appointing authority or DG is allowed to just look for somebody and identify that person and dispense with various procedural issues, requirements, because maybe that person is very suitable, and maybe there is no one else that seems available to meet the requirements of the post or something like that. But you are saying even if you headhunt, those procedures must still be complied with.
Yes, Chairperson, if I may say also, the condition for you to do the headhunting, you must have started with a normal advertising, open it up to the market, shortlist, and you're not getting a suitable candidate, and you can then, which is what happened with Mr. Dipoko. So you must have completed that process, and then you can then headhunt. You can headhunt 1 or 2, but still there should be a panel that interviews.
Thank you.
Chair, just to be of assistance to close off this aspect, at page 162 of Exhibit F1 is the relevant Regulation 65 of the Public Service Regulations that deals with advertising. And consistent with the testimony that we've heard from Ms. Williams, and I'll just highlight a few examples. Regulation 65(1) says, an executive authority shall ensure that vacant posts in the department are advertised as efficiently and effectively as possible to reach the entire pool of potential applicants, including designated groups. It then goes on over the page at 162 sub 4 of Regulation 65 to record that an executive authority shall advertise any other vacant post as a minimum within the department, but may also advertise such post in the public service locally or nationwide. Ms. Williams, is that consistent with your understanding of the process?
That's correct.
Thank you. If we can then return to page 9 of your statement. And Ms. Williams, I'm happy to announce that we are basically at the end, and just in advance of the lunch break. Ms. Williams, you record at paragraph 33 the change in the ministers in April 2017, and you've already given evidence that after the appointment of Ms. Dlodlo in the position of Minister of Communications, you were reinstated. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
What did Minister Dlodlo do in relation to your outstanding requirement to be compensated at level 16 for the period that you were acting cabinet spokesperson?
Chairperson, one of the first things that I did was to also raise that there were these matters that were outstanding, and she approved, and then I was compensated according to the Public Service Commission.
At paragraph 34, you refer to a request that you received from Minister Dlodlo in relation to Mr. Dipoko and Mr. Momeko. Could you tell us about that request?
When Minister Mtambi was transferred to the DPSA, she then wrote to the new minister, Minister Dlodlo, requesting that the two officials be transferred, Mr. Donald Dipoko and also Mr. Zweli Momeko, made a request that they be transferred. In fact, one was to be transferred and the other one was to be seconded with immediate effect, which I did the paperwork to get them to be transferred to the DPSA.
Ms. Williams, what I envisage to be, my penultimate and then my final question. At the bottom of page 9, you talk about the period of time for which you have acted as DG of GCIS. How long has that been?
I think when I was calculating, I even shocked myself also. It came to about 58 months acting. That was subtracting the period of Donald Dipoko. In total, in the 6 years, I have been acting for 58 months.
And 58 months is 6 years? Or what is it?
Slightly less because I excluded
my arithmetic.
Just over 4 years as I have it. 4.5?
Yeah, my arithmetic is bad.
Mine's very bad too, so I'm asking for confirmation from my learned colleagues. I think it's about 4.5 years.
That's
okay,
right.
all right, thank you.
Ms. Williams, over the page at page 10, you offer some concluding remarks in your statement. And you talk, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, about your commitment to public service. But you end at paragraph 39 in the last sentence with the following, and I quote, "As a result of the Minister Mutambi's behavior, an essential government institution that was built from 1998 was rendered dysfunctional." Ms. Williams, you'll recall in an engagement that I had with the chair earlier, I spoke about the insights that the experts who gave testimony on Friday provided to the Commission about the governance that is undermined within key institutions when state capture takes hold in a society. Could you please, with reference to that comment, give us a sense of the dysfunction that you believe occurred within GCIS during the period that you've testified about?
Chairperson, I indicated that we lost a lot of senior people. And she refused to fill those posts, resulting in people doubling up, people not doing certain things because they are short-staffed, and basically everybody was doing the bare minimum because if a section was meant to have 4 people and 3 are gone, virtually that one who's remaining will try wherever it is possible. It's just not going to work. And that's basically what was happening. If I can cite the example of the DDG of the section of media buying left. Mr. Dipoko, who was the media buyer, was elevated to being a DG. The remaining person was the director of media buying, who at the time was even new, and that whole section was almost dysfunctional. I should even mention that Minister Mutambi was quite even generous in giving people out to other sections. There was a chief director who was responsible for editing the Vukuzenzele that I spoke about. She almost like removed the person and he says, no, go and help in another department. And when we tried to say, Minister, this person is responsible for editing. And she says, no, it will happen. You see how you manage. And that's basically what she was doing, and completely rendering our provincial office in the Northwest, there was a vacancy. For a very long time, she never approved that that post be filled. That office also became dysfunctional. And I'm just citing a few, but there were quite a lot of them that just completely couldn't function because there were no people.
You say she refused to fill posts. That doesn't make sense to me if there was funding for those posts. Are you able to say anything to me? I would understand if you were saying she wanted to fill the post maybe with certain people, but to refuse to fill posts at all if there was funding for the posts doesn't understand it. I don't understand it. Do you understand it? Is there anything you can tell me that can make me understand it?
Chairperson, I was saying that for me, she was almost like working against the state. There was no reason why you don't want to fill the posts. It is in your interest that the institution should function correctly. There is funding. However, they had this narrative of wanting to prove that this GCIS people who are there are useless. We need to find other people who can come in and deliver. Phumla is not delivering because she's not effective. So they were almost like wanting to render the institution completely dysfunctional and find reasons to say, you know what, this acting of Phumla is not doing it for us. Let's find somebody so that she can then crack and make the difference in the organization, because there is absolutely no reason. There was funding, there was established posts, but she just preferred that it must disintegrate until they then say this institution is dysfunctional. We need to get other people to come in, and that's my interpretation. She might be having a different one, but my view is that they were trying to push the narrative that the institution needs fresh people.
Well, it would be helpful if you are able to, if you were to make available information that shows what posts were vacant during her time and were not filled, and how long they remained vacant. Is that information that would be easy to get?
Certainly, it's easy. I will arrange it and we'll hand it on.
Thank you.
Chair, forgive me. Just a few matters. I'd like to follow up on one question in relation to your testimony, and then, Chair, I'd like to address you in relation to notices to implicated persons, following from the evidence of Ms. Williams. I do note that we are at the lunch break time. Would it be convenient to break now and return?
Well, it depends what's going to happen after lunch. If there is no witness lined up for after lunch, I think it would be more convenient to finish with her evidence. You talk to me about the notices to implicated persons, and we adjourn for lunch and then not come back. But if there is a witness lined up for after lunch, then we can take the lunch break and then come back.
Chair, as I have it, there's no witness lined up for after lunch, and so with your leave, I will proceed.
Yes, no, that's fine. And in the meantime, Mr. Pretorius is excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may just take a moment to confer with my colleagues.
Thank you.
Chair, I've been reminded by my learned leader that the next witness is only scheduled for Thursday. He will be the witness that I foreshadowed in some of my questioning of Ms. Williams from National Treasury, who will look at the payments from GCIS and other departments to TNA Media and Infinity. So as matters stand, and in the light of your directions this morning, there will be no witnesses until Thursday at this point.
Okay.
Then, Ms. Williams, just to follow up on your testimony just before this interaction about the dysfunction within GCIS as a consequence of what happened after you were removed from the Acting Director General post around 2014. You've made some references to media buying. You've testified about Mr. Dipoko, who came from that department, brought into GCIS, as I have your testimony by Mr. Manyi, and then elevated from the Chief Director position to Acting Director General in your position. But can you comment on what happened to media buying as an institution within GCIS during this period of turmoil in relation to its governance, as I understand your evidence?
Chairperson, during that time, the media buying was operating outside. You remember I said that it was removed from the branch that was called CSA, Communication Service Agency. It was a standalone. So what was happening at that time, because prior to during Mr. Manyi's time, this unit was reporting directly to the DG. So what happened is that a lot of activities that was happening in media buying, they were doing it directly with the Acting Director General, Mr. Dipoko.
Thank you. Chair, those conclude my questions for Ms. Williams. Insofar as notices to implicated persons are concerned, Ms. Williams' evidence has, her initial statement resulted in 3 notices to implicated persons being sent out by the Commission's legal team. Her evidence today has gone, in some respects, broader than her statement, and so, as a legal team, we will give consideration to whether further notices, whether supplementary notices to those who already received notices, or notices to new individuals need to be sent out in accordance with the rules. We just wanted to place it on record that that consideration will be given, and where the legal team deems it appropriate, those notices will be sent out.
I think that's important to make that announcement, because I was going to mention that to the extent that any persons may find that a witness who is giving evidence before this commission implicates them in circumstances where prior to that they have not been served with any notices, they must know that in due course they will be served with notices. So people mustn't think that we are allowing witnesses to come before the commission and just make all kinds of allegations against them without us notifying them. So what is happening is that where the commission's legal team is aware from a statement given by a witness that certain people are implicated, they make sure that those people are given notices thereof, excuse me, are given notices thereof ahead of that witness giving evidence. But what may happen is that when a witness is asked questions during his or her evidence, he or she may implicate other people who were not implicated in terms of the statement. And in that case, the commission's legal team would take steps as soon as possible to notify those persons that they have been implicated. That is what you have just explained.
Indeed, Chair.
No, thank you very much. Ms. Williams, you said you are done with your questions.
I am indeed, Chair.
Ms. Williams, thank you very much for having availed yourself to come and assist the Commission with information and evidence that you have. For now, you are done, but the legal team of the Commission will be in touch with you at some stage with a view to you coming back, because the various persons who are implicated in terms of your evidence will be wanting to be given permission to cross-examine you. But arrangements will be made, and you will then come back. Is that all right?
Thank you. It's okay.
Thank you very much. We are going to then adjourn. From what I've been told, the next witness will be on Thursday, but on Wednesday at 10 o'clock we may be here in order to deal with applications by implicated persons who seek permission to cross-examine various witnesses. But that may or may not be moved to Thursday, 10 o'clock, depending on what will happen tomorrow. But those who might ultimately want to know whether Wednesday has been moved or will be moved must just be in touch with the legal team or the commission sometime in the course of tomorrow afternoon. So we will then adjourn.